speak about that because this is a big question in Parmenides, whether we really have a closed sphere, or I mean, and that seems to be the case, certainly, with this sphere being full of what is, right, full of itself, right, and nothing beyond, nothing behind, precisely. But precisely because of this, it must be inclusive of all, right? So, so it is then ultimately perhaps incorrect to say that it is simply a matter of affinitude, which we have.
I mean, what's interesting here, what you're doing, it seems to me, between 1 and 3, is you're very much like Corre's, work on science, in which he says from the closed universe, right? To the opening of subjectivity into the infinite horizon and the birth of modernity, in a way. And you're kind of taking that position of the closed sphere is part of that cosmological tradition in which modernity, philosophical modernity, begins to, hammer the Copernican church, in other words,
Yes, but this is important because otherwise we simply reduce Parmenides to something which is again, Heraclitus vis-a-vis against Parmenides. But so that's why we said already last time that many people, including Hegel and Heidegger in particular, they say, well, ultimately Heraclitus and Parmenides say the same. Right, but it is so, and I like the question that you say about the open, right? That's why, in a sense, it's the dialectic of the closed and the open, if you will, or I prefer maybe to say at this stage that it is closed and not closed, right? I don't know if in any case, if we go to maybe
like Dostoevsky, the door stayed open a little bit.
Exactly, which is also what Bachelard speaks so much about in. The poetics of space. That's right. The door, the threshold. Let's go back to the threshold. Right. So I mean, to start with a fragment or a passage, rather, one by Sextus Empiricus. I don't want to read the whole thing. I mean, that's the poetic. We know that
this is a new edition of the Parmenidean poem, or this is the one that's.
It is a poem, right? I mean, on nature, interestingly. So, I mean, this is interesting too because I maybe will touch on that later. But if I forget, I say this by way of anticipation. Bournet says, Parmenides is actually the father of materialism. Not as some people might think of. Right, I mean, as Parmenides as at the beginning of the idealist tradition, he says he's at the beginning of the materialist tradition, and certainly this poem on nature, right, is very important in that sense. So I read this from passage 1 from toward the end, line, if you see where the number in the margin is 29, right, where he says, again, this is from Sextus Empiricus, and also from Simplicius. Simplicius is the sections on Parmenides are from the commentary on this one on Aristotle's on the heavens, then on physics also. So he says it is right that you learn all things, right? I mean, this is the question of the two routes that one can take, but at the beginning we see that it is also not mistaken to go the other route, right? But both the unshaken heart of well-persuasive truth and the beliefs of mortals, right? The doxa that will come back, the opinions in which there is not true trust. But nevertheless, you will learn these too, how it were right that the things that seem be reliably being indeed the whole things. Okay? So in any case, from here we go into, he will say very clearly, the idea that, and that's the method of Parmenides, that we have to follow only the routes of being, of what is, and not of nothing, of what is not. Right? That's the point. And so this is then fragment 2, or rather passage 2, again from Proclus, but also from Simplicius, this time the commentary on Aristotle's physics, but come now, I will tell you, and you, when you have heard the story, bring it safely away, which are the only routes of inquiry that are for thinking, the one that is, and that it is not possible for it not to be. That's the path of persuasion, for it attends upon truth. The other, that it is not, and that it is right that it not be. This indeed I declare to you to be a path entirely unable to be investigated, for neither can you know what is not, for it is not to be accomplished, nor can you declare it, right? So nothing cannot be thought about. Well, we can think about nothing. We can't speak about nothing, right? So it is the best way is to lead that route alone and take the other one, right? The path that leads then to truth, the path of what is. Again, and this will come back over and over again, right? That being, basically what is, not only is, but it must be, it cannot not be, and what is not, nothing, simply cannot be, right? It is right, what is not to be. And then there is this great, not even a sentence, right? This great thought that comes back. This is passage 3 from Clement, but then it will come back in the longest passage 8. We will see that in the middle of that passage again, the same thought, which is key, in order to understand Parmenides. So what he says is for the same thing is for thinking and for being. And that's right. And actually, maybe I will go back to that later. But if you go to page 60 for at least in our edition, that would be line 30. Indeed, no, it's 34, 33. Okay, in passage 8, where he says, I just read this line, then we'll go back to this long passage, right? What is for thinking is the same as that on account of which there is thought. Right? So same idea, right? For the same thing is for thinking and for being, and what is for thinking is the same as that on account of which there is thought. Right? This is another moment in which I believe that one can already appreciate what I was saying, what I say in point 1, that reality, right, as a whole is inclusive of, the potential. I mean, basically, what is not simply what is there in front of us. For example, thought. And he goes back to this as well. There is another moment in which he says that the two must always be together, right? But I don't know if we want to speak about this, but this is very important. And then maybe I read 6. What do you think if we actually do the reading of the whole passages, and then we'll go back to them at various points, but then after we do this, we can get into Hegel, what Hegel says of Parmenides. There is a very important page in a relatively brief section on Parmenides by Hegel. We will see something that Bruno says, which is also very important, and then Heidegger, okay, especially in relation to πελεῖν.
We're figuring out.
I just found the page.
Oh, you had not found it?
Yeah, because it's a different edition.
Oh,
Yeah.
Which of the poem are you going to read? From the Sextus Empiricus? From the new translation that Josh has?
No, I would say we read this from Kurt, right?
Well, which one? Is it Simplicius's commentary on Aristotle, or is it Sextus Empiricus?
Well, you mean the long passage?
Yeah, what passage? I mean, the entire verses.
It's by Simplicius, right?
You're going to go to that one?
Yeah, I'll go to that in a moment, okay? So far we have seen a few lines from passage 1.
Because to my mind, he's much less poetic than Sextus Empiricus in the translation, at least from what I can see.
But isn't your translation the same as mine?
Well, I mean, but you know, this is the sextus empiricus, the mares which carry me.
Okay, no, I haven't read that one.
You've
Yeah,
never read
no,
that? See,
I read
there's
that.
only still left a single story.
Yeah,
is the one?
we'll get to that in a moment, but from this passage, I only read the last few lines.
Yeah, I understand that, but which one are you going to read from? I mean, what?
From Simplicius,
Okay,
passage
okay,
8.
okay.
Yeah, I'll read that one.
Passage 8?
8, but not immediately. I mean, before we get there, I want to go over briefly
It's the less
passage.
poetic one.
Huh?
It's the less poetic one.
Less poetic.
I think, I mean, you know.
Yeah, no, it is, but I believe that it is more important.
Okay.
I mean, we read a few lines from the
Okay.
first one,
Okay.
and then philosophically more important, but
Because the metaphorics of the horse are very important. Right?
yeah, we can go over that as
Yeah,
well.
okay.
You want to read that?
No, it's okay. I mean, I'm just saying, you know.
No,
yeah.
you can
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah.
Passage 1, you want to read that? The whole passage by
The main.
Well, one is 61
Sextus
lines, right?
Empiricus.
One is 61 lines from the physics, right? Is the commentary on the physics. Is that correct? I'm
Yes.
sorry, I have an earlier edition. My apologies. I don't
Right,
have
no,
the
I
same
understand,
edition,
yes.
but I think it's almost the same.
Yeah, yeah.
It's 61 lines, right? Is that correct?
yeah. We'll read
61
that.
lines by Simplicius, the
Yes.
commentary on
Yeah,
Aristotle's
yeah,
physics.
we will read that.
Whereas the Sextus Empiricus is only 28 lines.
Right.
And then it's filled out by Simplicius when he does a little section on the
Right,
heavens
on the
he adds
heavens,
to, right?
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
the difference to my mind is that
That it
the
is
Sextus
not
Empiricus has much more of a poetic language. There's more
Yeah, no, I agree,
metaphors
yeah.
operative in that. There's more of the, you know, etc. I'm just
Yeah,
making
no,
that
no,
point.
I
I'm not
agree.
trying to
No, I
say
was
don't
going
read
to-
the.
No, but
Yeah,
I
that's
was
not my
going
argument. Yeah, I'm just
Forgo
making
that
comment there.
poetic and metaphorical moment, but if you want to, we can go over that as well.
Well, one is more elaborate, right? Obviously.
The other
It's the
one,
whole thing,
the
simplicity.
Simplicius.
Yeah.
Right, and that's why I
Right.
prefer to do
Right,
that.
okay.
Okay, so, but let me say, you know, this, again, passage, very short passage 5, right, because we saw all 3, at least, and that we linked that to the same thought in passage 8. But 5 says, for me it is indifferent from where I am to begin, for that is where I will arrive back again. Which you want?
In this one it says common, and it is.
Common to me.
Yeah, and it is all common to me, which
Okay.
I like that translation.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
which is also, if you will, right.
She's probably a better translator in the earlier edition
Okay,
than the
okay.
new one.
Yeah.
I mean, in some ways, she's getting
me,
old and
it's
senile
indifferent.
in the
Yeah,
second
okay.
edition. I mean,
Yes, understand.
sorry. Yeah.
But
I
there
mean,
is,
it's a kind of a, what would I say, kind of a stale,
oh yeah?
you know,
the
compared to
replacement
the
of
earlier
common,
one
yeah.
that you just read.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because it is common to me from
Yeah.
where I am to begin,
Right,
right?
Mm-hmm.
For to there shall I come back again.
Yeah.
It's much more of a flow. I mean, you know, it picks
Yeah.
up on the verse and the meter, I think,
Right.
of what was, you know, really written in a kind of poetic
Yeah.
sense. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
no,
in
no,
my
but
mind.
I
mean,
know, I
yeah.
agree, yeah.
Because I know you're a poet, so that's why I say
I
this.
agree, yes. So, but no, I want to say that this is a reminder also in a sense of Heraclitus. Right? I mean, there is no, I mean, but there is something which is very close to Heraclitus, something that will come back as well. You know, the idea that, of course, reality, that there is no beginning, no absolute beginning, and no absolute end. I mean, just like we saw that in Heraclitus,
Oh,
it
Hegel,
comes
too.
back with,
Hegel.
yeah, Hegel.
This
and
is
then, of course,
this
the
is
whole-
an early formation of teleological thinking.
Right, but also, of course, Lucretius and so
Right,
on.
sure.
So, but the idea is that, again, it doesn't matter, you know, I mean, precisely, there is no beginning, no end, so it doesn't matter where you start. That's basically the idea. And actually, the other day I was rereading some Walt Whitman, and I thought, oh wow, but this is, you know, the concept, the idea of inception
yeah.
in Whitman is the same.
He says,
It's not a matter of a beginning, but any inception, any moment is equally good,
Yeah.
right, to start. Yeah. Mhm.
And
Right.
I think well, nobody likes T.S. Eliot, but
I like Eliot.
I like this.
I like it.
There's
I'm
the
not
line.
crazy about
What
it,
is
but
it?
I
In
like
my
it.
end is my beginning.
Yeah.
Four quartets.
Yeah, four quartets.
Yeah.
That's the early work, yeah.
Okay, so in any case, then we read six, no, we didn't read six, right? Let me go over this again. It is, and this is again Simplicius from, again, the commentary on Aristotle's Physics, to which we'll go back with passage 8, the longest. It is right both to say and to think that it is what is, for it can be. No, I think I read this, but I want to, go back. It can be. Right, although in the other translation is just you have also in this translation is for there is right. It's not the word used is not can, but the same idea, right? I mean,
yeah, but I like the earlier translation in a sense. That which is there to be spoken, that which is there to be spoken and thought of must be.
Must be?
Yeah, that which is there to be spoken and thought of must be.
It's better.
Possible for it to be,
It can be.
but not for possible
Right.
for nothing to be.
Right.
And it
Yeah.
makes you think in a different way, I mean, in a much more, I
Yeah.
think a poetic way, much closer to maybe what, I haven't looked at I'm not an
No.
expert in the ancient Greek by any means.
Yeah, no.
But it seems to
yeah.
me that the mind, when you begin to process something like this,
Yeah.
you're getting more of the force of what the originary or the Ursprung really
I
was.
wonder why she changed the translation.
We gotta call her and ask her.
Yeah,
Maybe
it's
she just
interesting.
got older, or she was drinking too much.
Yeah, but the idea, in any case, Michael, the idea of the potential is there.
Potential is there, right here.
And
It's what
maybe
you're
it's-
talking
it-
about
it-
in your first one.
Right,
I think
it's,
it's more here in
stress-
terms of the
right.
inclusiveness.
Because it says, for it is not
Yeah.
possible for it not, for it, sorry, it is possible.
It's possible for it to be, but not possible for nothing to be.
Right.
Right, exactly
Okay.
what you said.
Yeah.
Yes.
Here, see?
Yes.
So that's nice. And then he says, I bid you consider this.
Right.
He asks you, he makes a calling, it's an appellative representation, if you will. It's a calling forth at the representative level, right? What will be,
Right.
I bid you consider this.
Okay.
For I bar you from this first way of inquiry.
Right.
It's
No,
interesting.
absolutely,
The
yes.
text, and this is rewritten by Derrida, as you know, in dissemination.
Right.
The text hides from its first comer.
Yes.
You are barred from an interpretation. I mean, this is interesting to me in terms of the
Yeah,
science
no, I agree,
of
yeah.
interpretation.
Yeah, I mean,
Just-
so for it is possible for it to be, here it's rendered as for it can be, but nothing is not, and so on. In this actually translation is again the same fragment 6. It must be that what is what is there for speaking and thinking of is for it is there to be, whereas nothing is not. But in any case, the important point to consider, and I agree, is really this of a potentiality, right? The potentiality is within the real, okay? And so then and as you were saying, Michael, for I call you back from this first route of inquiry, and then from that in which mortals, knowing nothing, wander to head it for helplessness in their breasts, and so on and so forth, with their wandering mind. And then I skip to the last two lines that we had already read, but for whom, right, to be πελεῖν and not to be, right, which is eni, are thought to be the same and not the same. So this is the issue that apparently he takes with Heraclitus, so that people thinking that way, okay? So the thinking of that everything becomes and so on. Okay, so then we will go back to this, to the question of πελεῖν, but then fragment 7, or rather again passage 7 is also important, at least the first line is very important, right? Because it says, for in no way may this prevail, the things that are not are. Again, is it different in the first edition? I used to
For
use
in no way may this prevail, the things that are not are.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Which is also
But
very
it states very nicely with the right commas, it gives it again, in my opinion,
Yeah.
the poetic flow. I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
I know.
I mean, she's careful here, I'm sorry, yeah, see, for no way may this prevail, comma.
Right.
That things that are not, comma,
Yeah, right.
are.
You see that here it changed, there is
Yes,
a comma in the
yes, I know, I see that,
Yeah,
yeah.
right.
I told you, yeah.
Right, right.
She missed the comma,
Yeah.
you know, that was too
Right,
much wine, I think.
So, but this, okay, so for, in no way may this prevail the things that are not are, right, I don't know if you want to,
No, I mean, it's nice, but I mean, you know, what he really would, this translation is doing, it's setting up again that, that this not prevail, that things that are not are, right? So she's giving the space, you know, in this translation for the are not, right?
Right.
Into the are.
Yeah.
So the two, the be and the non-be are both working out, you know, dialectically. I think it's better this way, you know, in a
Yeah.
sense, with the comma and the setting off. You're going to the Scottish now?
no, this is Bulli.
Burnett, yeah,
Right.
Scottish, isn't it?
Oh, to the,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
yeah. Okay, so, but because, you know, we can look at also the way he does this, which is also interesting. For this shall never be proved that the things that are not are. Okay, so you stay away from that path of English.
Yeah.
Okay, so
But you can see the difference here. I mean, I think this is interesting, at least for our purposes, given the fact that we have some influence. We have at least two poets in the room. Eloy probably writes poetry too. But anyway, you know, I try my hand at very abstract stuff. But anyway, all to say, it seems to me that what happens with Curd later and what Burnett does is that they set this into propositional form more. Right? Whereas this earlier Curd is much more poetic in terms of its translation. You know, and you also see this, there's a Greek translator, Alexander Mouralatos, who's a Parmenidean scholar, you know, who's done also a translation. I should have made, or we should have talked about that because he's done massive commentary on Parmenides. But I think, you know, for us that read Heidegger, and I think Hegel would pick up on this too. But this is really a poetics in some ways. It is the beginning of, the poesis, right? In philosophy. So
I mean, because then it was even like Lucretius also.
yes, of course. Yeah.
All right, so but I want to go into, because again, we do the reading now and then we'll go back to these passages, the reading according to Curd, right? I mean, just to follow one book, and then I will go into the Hegel and so on. So this is passage 8, which is the longest. Who wants to read a few lines maybe so that I can read too, but maybe the first, something like 10 lines. And
You probably have a different translation.
Ah.
You have the edition I have, right?
Yeah.
It's similar.
Yeah, okay.
I think it'll be okay.
Okay, yeah, no, I know.
There's still left a single story of a way that it is. On this way there are signs exceedingly many, that being ungenerated, it is also imperishable, whole and of a single kind, and unshaken and complete. Nor was it ever, nor will it be, since it is now, altogether one, continuous. For what birth will you seek for it? How and from where did it grow? I will not permit you to say or to think that it grew from what is not. For it is not to be said or thought that it is not. What necessity would have stirred it up to grow later rather than earlier, beginning from nothing? Thus, it must either fully be or not.
Okay, maybe we can speak about some of the. There are differences in the between the old and the new edition here. In any case, there is one round only, which is there are men, right? There it is. Okay, this round there are signs precisely many. That what is ungenerated, imperishable, a whole of a single kind, unshaken and complete. So here we had the idea of it being complete, right? So a finite, if you will, sphere, a plenum, but we should keep in mind that it is in reality not necessarily, not literally so, precisely because there is nothing beyond, nothing outside, right? So it is, so that's inclusive again of a possibility of a potentiality. So And it is here, nor was it ever, nor will it be, since it is now all together, one holding together. This is actually what, in a sense, relates very closely to Heraclitus, and it is as if they said the same from a different, perspective, coming from different places. In a sense, if you remember the passage about the cosmos, right, which was for our edition, page 45, passage 45 in Heraclitus, this cosmos, the same for all, none of gods nor humans made, but it was always and is and shall be an ever-living fire, and so on and so forth, right? So what we find in Parmenides is nor was it ever, nor will it be, since it is now. So in a sense it seems to be the opposite. I don't know if you recall, maybe it was 2 weeks ago that I gave made the analogy with language, right, and Heraclitus is speaking in terms of the present progressive or continuous tense, and Parmenides in terms of the simple present tense of right, something indefinite, again, generic time, timelessness in a sense. But ultimately, what's really important that they both stress is the fact that there is no beginning, there is no end. Okay, whether it is this situation that we have with Heraclitus, this constant movement and this dynamic, never-ending fire, or we have this now, which was not before and will not be, because otherwise it would be nothing, and nothing cannot be, right? But ultimately it is the same idea of reality of the cosmos that we have, right? Of something which is ungenerated, imperishable, right? I don't know if you see the okay. So the link, okay? So then, of course, it's not possible from nothing, right? Nothing comes, right? So what birth will you seek for it, out for it? How and from what did it grow? From nothing, from what is not. I will not allow you to say or think, you already read it, but for it is not to be said or thought that it is not. What need would have roused it later or earlier, having begun from nothing to grow? So that's a very interesting also question, right, about time, like again, the inception, why later, why earlier, at a point in time, but it is time itself that begins.
Again, the interesting thing about the translation, which you just read, the earlier occurred, what necessity would have stirred it up?
Yes, I know.
Which is much more, again, DK, who controls the gates of night and night and day, is what necessity would have stirred it up to grow later rather than earlier, beginning from nothing.
Right.
And this is, as you know, the ordering, the DK becomes the ordering of justice. There's a very political connotation here. That plays out much, much later. Yeah.
So, nor will the force of true conviction ever permit anything to come to be beside it from nothing, from what is not. For this reason, neither coming to be nor perishing did justice, as you call attention to, allow, right, and so on. And then the important point is that Brunet also remarks on this very, in a very important way. The decision about this thing, you see that, is this, right? Is or is not, right? And this is where the question, is it or is it not? And then we'll go back to this when we speak about the method of argument in Parmenides, right? Is it or is it not? That's the decision that must be made. That's the question. And I want to say at this point also that this is where Parmenides occupies a very important place in the Presocratics, in the Presocratic tradition, and in reality, as Hegel says, with Parmenides, philosophy proper begins. Right? So, but if we recall the question, the original question that started philosophy with Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes, and then with the others, what is it? And the difficulty in answering this question, because precisely everything changes, so you cannot say what it is, then the hypothesis of this underlying reality, the arche, which does not change while everything changes, the attributes change, but the nature, the underlying nature remains the same. And then we saw that actually Heraclitus, his contribution among others was to say, look, I mean, again, this is actually not a problem, it's not a difficulty, it is what it is. That's reality, change, the process, right? Fire. But now with Parmenides, we have a very important situation because he's the first to displace, I mean, he doesn't displace the question altogether, but he says, you know, before we ask the question as to what something is, what it is, we have to make sure that it is, because it could also not be. And if you keep this in mind, this is the similarity, the link that I want to make to Descartes later, you know, because that's the same method of argument, right? Before we ask the question, what is it, let's make sure that we know that it is. Just like Descartes, I say by way of anticipation, will say, you know, first of all, I had to find out if I am. Once I know that I am, and we will see, of course, the methodic doubt, then I can ask the question, what am I, right? And in Descartes, the answer will be a thinking thing, and so on and so forth. In Parmenides, we
that's
have...
the only thing you're certain of.
Yeah.
That you are the cogito.
Right.
That's
yeah,
the
exactly.
only thing that brings you certainty,
right,
because everything else, through hyperbolic skepticism or hyperbolic doubt, will lead you
can be called into
and
question.
the methodological doubt is much more of the deductive system that you're probably, working with.
Absolutely.
The deductive. So there are two major doubts working in Descartes: the hyperbolic and the methodological.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
But I also wanted, that's right, but I also wanted to make and I will go back to this, that's in the method of both Parmenides and Descartes, the important distinction between that and what. Thatness and whatness. You know, before I know what I am or what anything is, I have to make sure that I am or that anything is, right? I mean, that comes before what, and then we will talk more, maybe we can speak more about this in terms of existence, right? That something is existence and essence, what something is. Okay? So, but in any case, that's what Parmenides does, right? I mean, he doesn't erase the question, right, of Presocratic philosophy, what is it? And you see what very, you know, the very interesting answer that Parmenides will give to the question, what is it? Which is, again, very similar to what Descartes then does with, you know, in modern philosophy with his subjective, if you will, take in the establishing of the self. But Parmenides will say that, then we will see later in this same passage, that it is it itself. So you don't have to go beyond, right? It cannot be anything other than it itself, because anything other than it itself would be precisely the negation. It's negation, right? So it would be anything other than being would be non-being. Anything other than what is would be what is not. But remember that what is not cannot be thought about, cannot be spoken about. Right, so we are, in a sense, it seems, one might say that like Parmenides, we are stuck with this sphere of being that lacks any possibility even of motion and so on and so forth. But it's actually very interesting, a very important moment in philosophy, and certainly at the beginning of metaphysics, right? Because he says, first of all, let's make sure that it is, and this is where the question is. The decision must be made. Is or is not? Is it or is it not? And the answer, very logical answer, according to Parmenides' logic, is not only that it is, but that it cannot not be. It is and it must be, just like later in Descartes, right? And why? Because, right, if it is not, like I was saying before, it would be the opposite of itself, it would be nothing. But nothing cannot be, because if nothing is, then it is something, right? So there is this, the logic of non-contradiction whereby it either is or it is not.
Right.
And the answer is not, this is not Parmenides' preference, but it is, right, according to Parmenides, the very logical method of argumentation whereby it is and it must be, whereas nothing is not and it cannot be. Right? So when the question comes, I'm repeating again, what is it then? Well, the answer is already there. It must be it itself. What is? Full of itself. Right? That's the answer that we will see. Just like in Descartes, I know that I'm anticipating other things, but just like in Descartes, after, I find that I discovered that I am, what am I? It cannot be any other thing than precisely this I think itself, the thinking thing, right? Right, for the same type of logic, right? It cannot be any other thing. That's right. We will see that later again, but I don't know if anyone, because I forgot the meditation, Descartes' meditation.
I printed
Hello.
All right.
I just wanted to say happy holidays.
Same to you.
Same to you.
Yeah, thank you, Al. Okay.
Yeah, maybe I should do that now. I mean, go a little, since we are speaking about this,
Okay.
into the, be a little, elaborate on the link between, because of course in Descartes, we know that Descartes begins precisely with the doubt, of doubting everything. Let's see where I can, if, I can call everything
Well,
to doubt.
one way about going about this would be interesting to look at what's really being doubted are, first of all, the senses and sensory knowledge, right?
Yeah.
And sensory data, right? Because really, the reason that I guess Parmenides is called the father of, Western thinking is because of the level of abstraction.
Right.
It's no longer sense perception and sense knowledge that we're getting or sense data. So, Descartes' main thing in the doubt is to demonstrate how sense is deceived, right?
Right,
That the senses are deceiving us, right?
Which is already in Plato, right?
Yes, of course,
Something in
of
Plato,
course,
and
yeah.
In a sense it is already in Parmenides when he says, do not take that
That's
route,
right.
which
That's
is
right.
the route
Yeah.
of path of opinion.
Yeah.
But making the link, I wanted to say how precisely. There is this great similarity whereby when Descartes calls everything into doubt, the senses and so on, then he stops precisely at, there is a moment where he has to stop because even, if I doubt that I'm thinking, I'm still thinking, and so that's the end of the methodic doubt, right? I can call everything into question, into doubt. Maybe I'm not speaking. When I speak, I can say maybe I'm speaking, maybe I'm not speaking. But when I think, even if I say maybe I'm not thinking, I'm still thinking. So thinking is precisely right the unshaken ground that Descartes is looking for. He says, if I find something, okay. Otherwise, I just say that there is nothing certain. He finds something certain. That is that. I am. At this point, I know that I am. But then there is in Descartes one of the most beautiful moments in philosophy, certainly in Descartes, when he says, but now I had to make sure that I know what I am, because otherwise I could mistake any other thing for myself. Right? And of course, when he says that, that's very interesting, but it's not that I will mistake this desk or the board for myself. I might. Right, but the question is, I might mistake the senses, precisely, the body, for myself. That's not what I am. So then Descartes dismisses the body altogether, right? And he says, then what am I really? Well, I found, then there is a whole process, but ultimately thinking. I am a thinking thing, a thing which thinks, which is the same as, what is it being? What am I thinking? Same idea, and actually, we see that in Descartes this is so important because then he says a thing made of thought. That's what a thinking thing is. So, because things are made of something, right? What is the material making this thing that I am, right? Which is the I think, the mind / soul, the thinking thing. It is thought itself. So there is this paradoxical, if you will, immaterial material. So it's not that when he says I am a thinking thing, I'm not a thing like which with a relative autonomy for thinking, like a digital device, right? I mean, so I'm not like this body which also has the capacity for thinking. They also has this feature, right? No, I am precisely that thinking thing, exclusively made of thought. Okay, so it is full of thought. For Descartes, the I, the self, just like in Parmenides, being, in a sense, what is that he discovers is full of what is. I don't know if I was successful in making the link between the method of the logic in Descartes and in Parmenides. It's amazingly, similar, almost the same, Okay, maybe we'll go back to this, but I find it very, very interesting. So to continue with the passage itself, and then we'll get into Hegel and then the others, okay? So now we know that it has been decided. As is necessary, Michael goes back to the question of necessity, right? It is necessarily this way, right? So remember the question, is it or is it not, right? As is necessary to leave the one route unthought of and unnamed, for it is not a true route. So that the other route is and is genuine. But how can what is be hereafter? How can it come to be? For if it came to be, it is not even if it is something going to be. Thus, coming to be has been extinguished and perishing cannot be investigated. Nor is it divisible, since it is all alike, and now he gets in the question of what it is, right? The question of whatness. And so thus, not at all more in any way, which would keep it from holding together, or at all less, but it is all full of what is. Okay, that's the answer to the question, what is it? So no longer water, or aperon, and so on, full of what is, okay? Therefore, it is all holding together, for what is draws near to what is.
Here, therefore, it is all continuous, which is a nice. Or what is draws near to what is.
I mean, the interesting thing here, again, going back to decay as the bonding goddess of justice, she occurred in the translation, and Parmenides uses the verb holding and holding fast. And basically what you're setting up here again is ordinances, right? Based on the what is, right? I mean, this is very interesting. And then further down, mighty necessity holds it in the bonds of a limit. Again, it's decay. Again, justice. The notion of, the mighty necessity. It does this.
Which is also...
So again,
Also the necessity that we already found, of course, and then we saw what Heidegger had to say in the Anaximander fragment, no? Remember?
Yes, of course.
It was the cycle whereby things come to be, and then in Anaximander, of course, perish, right? Pass away because of this necessity and so on. So, the difference certainly in Parmenides is that there is this discovery, one might say, this highlighting certainly of the moment of being, that which is, what is, right? And in order to do so, he has to evidently deny the possibility of coming to be, because if he can, anything that comes to be was not there before, was different, or moving, again, passing away, because again, one would, just like in Heraclitus, go, or in Hegel, for that matter, one would go from being into nothing. Remember that for Hegel too, the truth is becoming, which is precisely the fact that being has passed over into nothing and nothing into being, right? So in Parmenides we don't have that, although Hegel speaks of dialectic in Parmenides too, and Okay, Tony, yes.
No, just this nice sentence from the Marias book about Parmenides, that he interprets, this section. He interprets motion as light and darkness as an illuminating and a darkening. That is, coming to be is nothing more than a coming to be apparent. Things which seem to come to be already existed, but in darkness.
Yes.
Yeah,
Exactly. He speaks, and
returns
that's a
of
very
the
important
perceptive
Marias,
sort of faculties.
And that's a very important moment also. This is why, like I say, potentiality must be included because, again, they were already there. In a sense, it's a matter of being revealed.
Yeah.
If anything, then one can think about Heidegger and the aletheia, the coming into unconcealment and so on.
Also Hegel, the Erscheinung.
Yes.
Throughout
yes.
the phenomenon.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
The appearance, the
Right.
logic of the appearing, the Erscheinung.
Right,
the,
right.
The semblance.
The semblance,
all the way
yeah.
to yeah.
Right, which is also again at the basis of Plato's own metaphysics, right?
Yeah,
Of,
the appearance, reality,
right,
the
yeah.
distinction between the original play of light.
Yeah.
Refraction.
So the point is, and that's why the point of essence, because for something again, one can speak a little about the question then of existence and essence in general, but of course that's a big problem, of course, in philosophy and in the tradition then of metaphysics and of theology, of course, we know, including Spinoza, right? The philosophers will say that it is only God in whom it is only in God that essence and existence come together, they coincide, right? So therefore you cannot think about God and not think that he actually exists. That's what Descartes also says. And the beginning of the ethics in Spinoza is the same, very traditional. Then of course the big radical change in Spinoza is this God is nature, and nature is God, but otherwise the self-cause is precisely that for which essence and existence are the same, right? They are together. Whereas for any other thing, anything that exists is, for any other thing, essence and existence are two separate domains.
Right, existence literally comes from the stand out.
Yeah, that's in the
outstandingness is really the standing out of something.
Right, in the
etymology, whereas the essence itself is more the being found.
Right, exactly.
So you have this kind of very interesting play here.
Right, absolutely.
And Descartes is very interesting on this when he criticizes everyone from Aristotle to Kant as privileging essence over existence, that we basically get into this fixity and we forget this moment of the outstanding or the existence, and it's much more radical to begin with what you're talking about, the what is, and the isness of something, than it is to get into the essence, etc. Which takes us out of bureaucratic thinking, labeling, prejudicial thinking, all of these things which people forget that existentialism as a movement in philosophy was able to strip all these kind of categories in a very, very significant way.
I'm sorry. I completely agree, and certainly from Kierkegaard and then Sartre existentialism is humanism, precisely he operates that reversal of essence and existence. Although then Heidegger will say that even a reversal of a metaphysical truth is still a metaphysical truth, right? In later on humanism, of course, then Heidegger will criticize Sartre and ultimately the whole movement of, but it is true in the that's what gives existentialism its name, as you say, existence as a standing out, which is the ecstatic moment.
And precedes essence. In a way, it precedes essence.
Precedes essence.
Yes, that's the Sartrean moment temporally that that the existence precedes the outstandingness, you know?
Right,
And in some ways, that's close to Heidegger in terms of historicality.
Right.
That historicality is the happening itself, right? In another way. That
Yeah,
we think of history as class struggle, but also should be thought of too, you know, that motor of history, but also what is happening.
Yeah.
You know, the happening itself
Yeah, absolutely.
is that moment of historicality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
So I think this is very, you know, very
Yeah,
good
yeah,
what you're
very
doing here,
important, yeah,
you know, in
and,
the sense of, yeah.
Right,
Yeah,
and the question of existence so understood, I mean, in the human context,
Right.
especially for
Right.
Sartre,
Right.
too, right, on the human plane, because otherwise other things maybe don't exist that way. Then very often, this is also the way, right, one finds it.
That's right.
And it is the ecstatic standing out, precisely of which
Yeah.
Heidegger also
That's right.
then he criticizes.
Ecstatic temporality. He
Right.
criticizes Sartre. Sartre doesn't really
Which
look
he-
at this temporally like Heidegger does.
absolutely.
It's
Which,
not the horizon of time, it's the horizon
Right,
of nothingness in which we're seeing
right,
this.
which is actually, I mean, since we opened this remark on Sartre, that many people overlook the importance of precisely the word situation, the concept of situation.
Yes.
I mean, because of course we are always we are always framed, right? We are always in a situation,
Right.
you know, the legal situation, but also simply the here and now, right? I mean, this is the situation in which we then become free. I mean, because for Sartre, right, the famous truth that we are condemned to be free, then not to be free, that right, we are not free, not to be free, is precisely, you know, related to this moment of existence, which is particularly, of course, important in the human context, because otherwise other things, right, would instead of existing, insist in being there in the same place, right? The desk is not going to move about and change its situation. The desk also is here now, but differently from me, the desk will be there forever, you know, unless someone, you know what I mean, moves
sure.
it. Whereas precisely the existence of, right, I mean, what gives the human temporality and as you say, and you know, what characterizes then the human being, according to the existentialist tradition, is precisely this possibility of standing out.
Right. You're opening up a can of
moving
worms
away.
here with psychoanalysis now.
Yeah, no, but because this is also, you know, the insistence
Yes.
of that whereby
Right.
Kierkegaard also says people then become numbers in the crowd,
Right.
in which they insist being the same,
Right.
and conforming to the same.
We vote today. We vote today. We
yeah.
all vote today, serially.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
Right? I mean, that's what it's
Yeah.
become. Yeah, in many ways, yeah. This is what electoral politics is based on.
Yeah.
In so many ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but in any case, maybe to close this, I mean, we can speak
Yeah.
more, but
No,
this
yeah.
very interesting, right, parenthesis remark on Sartre, existence and so on. We can go back and that maybe we'll touch on this again, but I want to also finish.
Well, the potentiality, I'm just going back to your method tonight, your lecture. I mean, the existence, the standing out is part of your number one, as the potentiality, both of what is and what can be.
Absolutely.
Together. That is the outstandingness.
And it will be also part of the meaning of πελεῖν, as we will see when we get into Heidegger. This πελεῖν also has this this character, this dynamic movement of this ecstatic, if you will. Actually, since we are speaking about this and the political thing that you say, and by way of anticipation, fascinating, then you know, Heidegger will link this to the polis.
Yes.
The pole of the polis, you know, is actually linked to this stirring and looming, you know, of fuses of nature, ultimately, but they relate to one another. Okay?
And also
This
a
is
great soccer star in its name.
Which one?
Pele.
Yeah.
Pele comes out of the pele.
Oh yeah, I thought so.
Great soccer.
I thought so. But especially in today's, in the global situation today, where we see all this unrest, from Chile, Colombia, Uruguay, Bolivia, and so many other places in South America, but also in Europe, right? Paris, Spain, and so on, and in also Hong Kong and Iran, and so on and so forth, right? I mean, it's amazing this uncontrollable kind of situation of which Bernard Stiegler speaks, right? I mean, it's part of
it'd
this.
be better to look at it in the dialectic between police and the control alongside the uncontrollable.
Right,
I mean,
but he speaks of uncontrollable societies,
Yes,
right? In
sure,
light of precisely the control society, which fails
That's
ultimately, will fail
That's right.
necessarily in controlling this precisely constant unrest. That's another way in which one can understand the movement of peleĩn, as we will see, this stirring and looming, this unrest. That, again, by way of anticipation, but like I said, fascinating, in Heidegger's lecture on Hölderlin, when he speaks about this, he goes into, what Sophocles' Antigone, where in a wonderful passage of the first Stasimon of Sophocles uses the same, okay? And the passage, right, which is very important. Maybe I can say this now. But by way of anticipation, we'll go back to this, but the famous, right, many wonders, many terrors, but nothing more wonderful.
It's the second Stasimon.
The first.
It's the chorus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The first
Stasimon.
Yeah.
Okay. You sure? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why?
I thought the first Stasimon just announced stuff. The status of that.
It is.
Here comes the daughter.
I checked.
Okay.
When I read it, I checked this again.
The meditation on Anthropos.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. I mean, it is the first strophe of the first Stasimon, right? Because there are various
Many are the wonders.
Many wonders, many terrors, but nothing more wonderful or frightening, dangerous, uncanny, dangerous than the human being.
Right.
And it's interesting that, like in the typical translation, like that I have also of the Antigone, πελεῖν is left untranslated, and then becomes such a key word, that which stirs and looms. That's precisely then as Heidegger would say.
I hate to be all over the place, but speaking of Hölderlin, this is where he goes mad in translating Antigone.
Yeah.
This is the point of the madness. This is a big thing in German interpretation, that Hölderlin plants the tree of liberty with Hegel and Schelling after the French Revolution. They're very good friends, the three of them come up together in the educational system, but Hölderlin actually goes mad. Some people say he feigned madness, but a lot of people think he goes mad because of his translation, that he's undergoing this kind of madness by, looking at Greek tragedy and translating the third, the trilogy, which was written first, by the way. Antigone was written before the other two. And the trilogy written before. Right. So he goes, and maybe one of the reasons that the πελεῖν may not be translated, that Hölderlin could not.
Right.
This may be part of the blockage in him also, the Stasimon. It's a very frightening passage too, if you really read it carefully, in terms of the overwhelming, and has a lot to do with Parmenides in this whole notion of the necessity of the goddess, right? Yeah. And the play of light and day and the opening of the gates. So this is very violent stuff.
He actually is the translation of
revolutionary.
This is the way in which Hölderlin translates the passage, the lines from Antigone, right? This is from Heidegger's lecture on lectures on Hölderlin. There is much that is powerful, yet nothing is more powerful than the human being. Okay, but then Heidegger will say, he says, well, Hölderlin too translates πελεῖν with the infinitive πελεῖν in a quite blunt and indeterminate manner. On one occasion by is, and on another occasion by there is. We say instead, this is Heidegger, that's the way he translates this, manifold precisely is the uncanny, yet nothing more uncanny looms or stirs beyond the human being. Okay, that's the looming, the stirring and looming of a πελεῖν, which becomes the uncontrollable moment. And it is, again, let's go back to Parmenides, then we'll go back to Heidegger later, but this is what Parmenides uses in that fragment, in that passage 6, where he says, he speaks about being and I believe, non-being, but this being is πελεῖν. It's not the most common word for a being, but it is this unrest. So again, if we look at Parmenides in this slide, we see that it is there is much more than a sphere which is fixed and doesn't move and so on and so forth. There is that too, but it is everything that is, and there is nothing beyond. That's precisely that, and that's where then, of course, we see that Parmenides is also at the beginning of the materialist right. I mean, if one thinks about Lucretius, that's what Lucretius, interestingly, on the nature of things, right? On nature, Parmenides, on the nature of things, that's what Lucretius says as well. Lucretius, who gives an exposition of the philosophy of Epicurus, of course, right? But that's what he says, right? No center, because the center is everywhere. No limits, no beginning, no end, no ground, and so on and so forth.
Center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yates, second coming, right? Anyway, going back just to the Kerr translation in this edition that Tony has, I mean, it's interesting vis-a-vis this whole thing of the limit and the sphere. For mighty necessity, this is line 30 in ours, right? For mighty necessity holds it in the bonds of a limit. Which pens it in all round, right? Okay? So your sphere, right? Since it is right for what it is to be, not incomplete.
Right.
For it is not lacking. If it were, it would lack everything.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And that's very key. And of course, this is what Parmenides says. And yet, also to go back to the open totality. We spoke about open totalization a few weeks ago. So it is, of course, not incomplete in the sense of lacking anything, but it is at the same time not closed in the sense of including everything that is and that can be, everything that seems to be, and everything that was in appearance or will be in appearance is already there, essentially, in a sense, contained as a potentiality, as even thought. Anything that we think about, it must be related to, intimately related to what is, right? So I can't, and this is, by the way, another moment that comes back in Descartes as well. I can think about something which, I can think about something that doesn't exist, but not about something that is not, in Parmenides' language. Am I correct? I mean, that's the difference. At some level, it must.
Well, he works with this going to Descartes, as you know, the very interesting sections on dreams, right?
Yeah.
In which, how do we distinguish whether we're awake or dreaming? And he talks about the strategy of representation, that almost all of representation happens in dreams as well as in reality. Right? So there's no essential distinction between dreams and waking state in representation.
Representation.
Right?
But also, also the idea that even, even something, even the idea, of an unreal being, right? I mean, an imaginary, precisely, the unicorn, an imaginary fiction is still real as an idea, right? So
yes, absolutely.
But, Tony, you want to say something?
What was I going to? Oh yeah, the primacy. It's like it gives primacy to the ability of thought to be making something, right? To be like, if it's like if you think, I had a philosophy teacher who did a lot of acid, and he said that in talking about Descartes, he talked about seeing clad cockroaches running up his leg.
Well, Sartre had problems with crabs and,
Who?
Sartre, when he took a lot of hallucinogens
Right.
in his 30s when he wrote The Imaginary
And no, as far as like
he thought he was a crab, he was so empty.
Oh, he thought.
Yeah, he really projected that onto him. That was his hallucinogenic experience,
Yeah, but the thinking as making, right? What there,
Well, that could be the making of an image.
Yes, I mean, and that's poiesis as well,
exactly.
the making of which is poiesis, right?
which is what this.
Okay, but because you already read those important lines, but I want to go back to some of the lines that we skipped. I mean, I want to read this as well, because I got probably before to 25, therefore it is all holding together, for what is draws near to what is. I mean, there is no empty space in between. I mean, the emptiness of the absolute lack of what is absolute nothing, whereas we will see with the atom is that the meon, the relative nothing, which is the void, then will become constitutive of reality. That's the correction, if you will, that the atomists will make to Parmenides, closed, and unmovable sphere, and so on. Okay, but in any case, so what is draws near what is, unchanging in the limits of great bonds. It is without starting or ceasing, since coming to be and perishing had wandered very far away, and that true trust draw them away. And this is also wonderful, right? Remaining the same and in the same and by itself it lies. Okay, so this is the fixity of what is, no movement and so on and so forth, but we know already that it is more complicated than that. And so remains, they are fixed. Precisely. And then are the lines that Michael you read, right? For mighty necessity and so on and so forth. Right, I read this, again, the translation is a little different, but ultimately the same. Fundamentally holds it on bonds of a limit which holds it on all sides. For this reason it is right for what is to be not incomplete. You just read this. For it is not lacking, otherwise what is would be in want of everything. So, and then we find the line again that we saw in passage 3.
Thinking and the thought that it is are the same.
Right, so what is for thinking, that's the translation there.
That's what it says.
Thinking?
No, it just says thinking and the thought that it is are the same.
Okay, here is what is for thinking is the same as that on account of which there is thought. Yes, of course.
I mean, this is Cartesian as of 20-something years earlier, right?
Yeah, there are so many.
The thinking thing, right? It's out right here. Thinking and the thought that is are the same.
Yes.
The process as well as the thought.
Right. Yeah, that is, absolutely. So that's why, of course, in Descartes there is that then a very important moment, right, in the beginning of modern philosophy of this subjective, if you will, take on it, but for not without what is, on which it depends, having been solemnly pronounced, will you find thinking. And again, this is an elaboration of that, right? Yeah. So you find thinking only in relation to what is, right? So again,
well, in this case, it's what is expressed.
Yeah.
In which it expressed. Right. So you have the saying now. You have the legging to go with the thinking. Together. Thinking and saying have to be the same at this point. So the same comes
Which
through.
draws
here.
attention to,
Yeah,
to
yeah.
language in
Yeah,
a
yeah,
really
yeah.
interesting
And,
way.
you know, in some ways, some people read this poem as elementary, as semiotics too.
Yeah.
You know, as science.
See it.
Yeah, this is really an elementary treatise on semiotics.
Okay, for nothing else either is or will be except what is, since precisely this is what fate shackled to be whole and changeless. Therefore, it has been named all things that mortals persuaded that they are true have posited both to come to be and to perish, to be and not, and to change place and alter bright color. But since the limit is ultimate, namely what is, it is complete. But the limit is ultimate, but this is where then what one should problematize, because the limit which is ultimate is actually ultimately lacking, right? I mean, in then the tradition that also we referred to earlier of Lucretius and so on. I mean, because it's not, the ultimate limit is not really a limit at all, again, because otherwise there would be something other than itself. Beyond the limit, you must have something, right? Because otherwise you don't have a limit if you don't have something beyond. But precisely because there is nothing beyond, this ultimate limit is ultimately not a limit. Right, so the ground is ungrounded, and the sphere, yes, again, we have the sphere, but in
this translation, it is complete, furthest limit instead of ultimate. It is complete on all sides, like the bulk
here too.
of a well-rounded ball, evenly balanced in every turn from the middle.
From the middle, yeah.
Right? For it must be not at all greater or smaller here than there.
Right.
The perfect sphere.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
For neither is there what is not, which would stop it from reaching its like. Right?
The same.
Nor is it what it is in such a way that there could be more of what is here and less there, since it is all inviolate. Yeah.
Right, absolutely. So there cannot be more or less, and so on and so forth. That's right. So it is what it is, full of itself, and it meets uniformly with its limits. Well, I mean, again, you know, there is more to read, but maybe we can. The next maybe stage was also to
Go to stage Hegel.
Yeah, I was thinking so.
Enters Hegel. Hello, George Wilhelm. Friedrich.
Then we see
Yeah,
some of
yeah,
the
yeah.
Bulli, and then Hegel again, although we got attention to Hegel already, but, and Hegel, there is particularly one page that I found really important, which is, I believe, page right to 253. 252 also, but you know, so I don't know how much we want to read of the Hegel. It starts on page 249 or 249. I mean, he does say that Parmenides is a striking figure in the Eleatic philosophy.
Which Hegel is, sorry, which one is it?
Hegel.
The lectures on the history.
The lectures on the history of philosophy. And it's in volume 1, and it's in the Greeks,
So, and then of course he says, I mean on page 250, he says the last paragraph, like about 10 lines from the bottom, that he says that the opposition between being and non-being makes its appearance still more clearly with Parmenides, right? And then on page 252, he speaks about the two roads, of course, that we saw. This is line 4 from the top, the one which is only being, and then which is not, therefore non-being. That's Hegel, right? It's being, and so not non-being. The path of conviction, the truth. The other, that is not being, and which is necessarily non-being. We saw this already, right? I mean, a being, that which is, what is, must be, necessarily, it can be, it is possible for it to be, whereas not. And that's also another important moment, the possibility, the potentiality that is included in reality is precisely the impossibility that goes with nothing, right? Yes.
No, but then the next line, a couple lines down, the nothing in fact turns into something, since it is thought or is said. We say something, think something, if we wish to think and say the nothing.
Right.
Yeah. So that does give us, yet again, like some sense of the affinity with Heraclitus.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. And also this idea that, of course, nothing that cannot be is again this absolute nothing. I mean, let alone the fact that in language we use nothing for whatever. No, I mean, in maybe a loose way, imprecise way. I mean, right? What happened? Nothing. I mean, how can? Certainly not nothing in the absolute sense of Parmenides. That can't happen.
But nothing happening is something.
Right, exactly.
Which is what is sort of
something which is not important and so on and so
right.
forth. We call it nothing. So there are many things we call not nothing as such, right? That is precise. And it is here that actually, interestingly, again, just like he did with Xenophanes, Hegel makes also a reference to Spinoza. Of course, the great saying by Spinoza, he says, omnia determinatio est negatio, right? All determination is negation, right? Which is very important in Hegel's reading of Spinoza. In Spinoza, well, but then maybe. Then he goes into simplifications, but let me read from page 253 and then maybe 254, in more or less the middle of page 253, unless you want to call attention to other points, right, moments. It is the sentence that begins with the words, this being, you see that? This being? Yeah, this being is not... apeiron, right? There is a reference to apeiron.
This being is not undetermined apeiron.
For maybe Eloy, you want to?
I haven't found it.
Oh, you haven't found it,
It's on page, it's in the middle of the page of 253, between 253 and 254. It's in the middle of the page.
This being...
And it begins with this. After
oh yeah. Parmenides, Simplicius, Parmenides. Sorry.
Okay, should I?
Yeah.
Anyone?
I'll read it.
Oh, okay. Josh, you can found it?
No. I'll show you what it is, Josh. Here, just give me the best.
What is it?
Yes.
This being is not the undetermined.
Okay.
Or maybe from the online version is different.
Maybe, I don't know.
Maybe the word apeiron should, no?
Yeah, I mean, actually,
parentheses.
actually, he has a different translation.
Really?
Yeah. He has a different translation. This being is not the undetermined. Yeah, here, it's
I
right
think it was
here.
the same
Right here.
translation.
Okay.
I just checked it on the side.
Thank you.
Yeah, with a pen, yeah.
Apparently
Oh,
it's a
okay.
different
Got it?
translation.
Oh, I didn't.
This being, okay.
For ours, it's...
Okay, here it is.
Yes, exactly.
This being.
Yeah. Okay, I think we all have it.
Oh, cool, who reads?
Yeah, I can read it. Yeah, okay. This being is not the undetermined areka, but it is kept within the limits of necessity. We similarly find in Aristotle that limitation is ascribed to Parmenides. The sense in which the expression limit is to be taken is uncertain.
Okay, and so I want to just stress this point. I mean, because we were speaking about this. I mean, Hegel says it's uncertain, but in fact it is problematic because the limit is ultimately not a real limit in any common sense of the word, right? You can continue.
According to Parmenides, however, this absolute limitation is as a
Decay, right?
decay. Absolute necessity clearly determined in itself. And it is an important fact that he went beyond the enculturated conception of the infinite.
Wrong gender for Hegel.
Sure.
Though in that on account of which thought is are the same, for not without that which is in which it expresses itself. We'll do find, though thought, seeing that it is nothing and will be nothing outside of that which is.
Okay, maybe just to remark on this, this is also part of not the whole question that we were speaking about of the inclusiveness of the potential, right? About this, and again the relation between thoughts and that on account of.
You know, Marx has a great critique of this.
Yeah.
You know that. I mean, Marx has a great critique in the Economic and Philosophical Manuscript about the thoughts, and Hegel.
Oh,
you know, this is Hegel's doing
yeah,
here is basically talking about the thought. You know, in concrete, and Marx overturns this in the Economic and Philosophical Manuscripts in the critique of the Hegelian dialectic.
Yeah.
No, I just thought it was
No.
interesting. I would put that out because this is, you know,
Another
kind of important
topic for our next seminar would be could be the singular and concrete, or the singular and the concrete.
Yes.
Precisely going from. Okay, so maybe we can continue. There is a great moment right now. Again, you want to.
Yeah, that is actually the main point.
And that's what
Thought
that is the main point.
Produces itself, and what is produced is a thought.
Right.
Thought is thus identical with being, for there is nothing beside being. This great affirmation.
Okay, so again, nothing beside being, so that means that, like we said before, let's put it this way, it is closed and not closed at the same time, and again, inclusive of thought, and the same as thought, and ultimately inclusive of the potential. This is, I mean, I stress this again and again, because otherwise, usually, maybe there is this, overlooking this moment in Parmenides, and therefore this reduction of Parmenides to simply write the philosopher of the logic of non-contradiction, contrary to the other logic, the dialectic, right? Logic of Heraclitus, and the third way that you were speaking about the other day as well is that's the problem, precisely that we are speaking about. But there is more, of course. There is something completely different in Parmenides.
Well, in some ways, we're trapped within these two paths of idealism and realism, and we haven't really gotten to the materialistic, dialectic in this context, right? I mean, in some ways. So this is the interesting part.
I have a question. I am just trying to make connections, to my level, and so one of the concerns that we have is with the hegemony of the power of reason is the subordination of eros. Is this the beginning in the Western thought of the subordination of eros, the senses?
Yeah, actually.
I mean, like what the critique of instrumental reason, the reification of it, in Marcuse, is that eros has been subordinated to logos.
Yes.
So much that we are unable to find the universal of beauty, for example. And he said we have to return to those connections through. We have to find the universality of beauty or freedom in the sensorial way. We have to be able to develop the
you
capacity
have to
feel.
theorize the senses again.
Yeah.
We become theorists of the senses again. this is what makes us human. So Marcuse is claiming that in some ways this kind of logic that is dominated from the domination of the logos as reason, right, in the Western tradition, has led to this impasse, this fixation, where eros no longer has become the topic as the guiding principle behind all of this. You know, they want to go back to that, which is a very Platonic concept, that eros is the guiding principle of philosophy and of thought. But the eroticization of everyday life, and as Stanley pointed out on Saturday, which was pretty good, it's not, I can say the F word on, yeah, okay. Anyway, it's not about just fucking, right? It's about eroticization of all of relations, you know, in a sense. And this is what's been, you know, dominated by the Western tradition, you know, this dominate the interpretation of logos as reason. In a sense. And what you're talking about, these two basic paths of the logic of non-contradiction, you know, the is and the is not, dominates so much, right, in a sense. So Marcuse, in his way, is, at least to my mind, I mean, I've thought about this a lot over the years, is that you know, Marcuse, in a way, is a sensuous materialist, right? And in a way, he's almost a Fourbachian Marxist, right, in a sense. You know, he has this kind of rational materialism like Bachelard on the one hand, but at the same time he's also thinking through the Fourbachian realm of the senses, you know, in a lot of ways, you know. So, not that he's again, I mean, reification comes out of this, very much so. And it's not only instrumental reason, I think it's also, you know, with all due respect to Descartes, it's the domination of the Cartesian, you know, project in modernity, as well as, you know, Western philosophy always playing off of, you know, these, you know, this thing. So we're really, I mean, to my mind, we're really at a loaded space here with the Parmenidean poem, because it opens up so much, you know, in terms of, you know, where we are. I mean, the Contemporary Relevance, Bruno's subtitle of this course, you know, the Presocratics.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
I will
but please.
Your comment also reminded me of the chapter, the Great Caliban in Federici's Caliban, in which she's talking about Descartes' project as being one that sort of had the effect of like subordinating the body to reason in such a way as to make it dominable by, you know, by sort of the industrial relations of the time, right? So you can direct the body in a very rational...
Manufacturing relations. The industrial relations.
Sure, of course, the manufacturing.
The real subsumption.
I mean, some read like Negre, and this is an interesting reading, Descartes as the, you know, basically the method, the discourse on the method and rules for direction of mind as a response to the manufacturing epoch of capital. This is really manufacturing capital, needs certainty of method, etc., and that this is another thing.
No, but it points, I mean, she points out the sort of potentiality of both tendencies in Cartesian thought, that one could definitely subordinate one's body to one's sort
of... The Marcuse is very interesting in the sense of the
logic to analyze one's situation as subordinate and sort of analyze one's situation as oppressed or what the
right.
So then my question is about potential. Because potential is in the being as being also material, right? Body. It is the fire in our belly.
The fire which is included.
There we go. Now we're talking.
And the subterranean fire.
No longer in the head, in the body.
Fragment 12, passage 12, Parmenides, right, speaks of a due amount of fire is inserted among it. You know, that there is this fire, this, you know, which goes back to the Unrest.
You hear Fuentes speaking here, huh?
Labor of fire, right?
Yeah, labor of fire too. And because we spoke about this last time, I want to say a few things. First of all, at the same time as Descartes, already Pascal spoke about the reason of the heart, right? I mean, the heart also has its reasons that, you know, reason as such ignores. I mean, and that's a very important.
Yeah, although, I mean, in all fairness to Descartes, if you read the Passions carefully, it's not like he forgot about the heart and it all became cogito. I mean, with all fair, I mean, it's a very, this is a monster, this 17th century thinker. I mean, they don't make minds like this. This was a universe at work, different planet.
Alive?
Yeah, he nailed animals to
Who?
Descartes to sort of study them. This was how dissections were done anyways, and to prove that, there's no, the body is not that.
The body's not the soul.
Yeah, the body's not the soul. So, and essentially that the animal doesn't even feel pain
Well,
in the first place.
there's another legend about him, but I don't think it's true, that, he lost his daughter when she was 13, Francine. And the legend had it that he made an inflatable doll of her and took her everywhere. Yeah, but that's just a legend. I mean, this is talked about in the history of philosophy.
I just wanted to...
I'm sorry. We're way off topic. But, he started this with Eros, so
and we
it's
spoke about this last time. And last time, actually, we went into speaking about Heraclitus. I read the section, the passage from Nietzsche, that I can read it again. In addition to Marx, about what I then quote in Labor of Fire from the Grundrisse, right? The labor is the form giving fire. But if you recall, then this is what Nietzsche says in Das Spoke Zarathustra: the body is a great reason, a plurality with one sense, a war and a peace, a herd and a shepherd. An instrument of your body is also your little reason, my brother, which you call spirit.
Can you read that last part again?
Instrument,
you said.
An instrument of your body is also your little reason, my brother, which you call spirit, in scare quotes. A little instrument and toy of your great reason. Okay, this is in the section on the despisers of the body in Nietzsche. And then he says, in the same section, he says, the body does not say I, but does I. And again, there is more reason in your body than in your best wisdom. And then also what you were saying about theorizing, the senses theorizing, in Marx, precisely in the philosophical economic manuscripts, there is this, maybe that's the most important passage in a sense in Marx when he speaks about the emancipation of the senses, right? That it's the same idea that you were speaking about, right? So that is again the sensuous being recovered by Nietzsche as well as by Marx in very similar ways, right? And that's
we're not human until the senses have been emancipated. We don't hear, we don't see, we don't taste, really.
Right.
This is all, part of this,
Right, but it is also, as you were saying, that the senses would theorize that it is the body itself.
Yes.
So it's also unity, if you will, of theory and praxis.
Yes. Yeah.
Right, that's basically
been divided for many years.
Yes. That actually Balibar makes a point on this in the philosophy of Marx.
Right.
Kind of unity of the passing.
It's all over Gramsci and others.
Right.
Song of Dahl, as you know, right?
Of
the
course.
books on labor, the Frankfurt School, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it is there that Eros is precisely recuperated, if you will, recovered, and that doesn't mean that Logos, especially in the different, alternative understanding of Logos as the gathering and so on, must be dismissed. It is actually the unity, although the word unity, you were saying the other day, and I agree, but it is they are not joint operation.
If I could just say that Logos, the problem is, at least to the Heideggerian Marxist tradition, is that Logos has been interpreted traditionally as reason. And reason then becomes taken up as domination, right? It becomes instrumentalized, but it's also operationalized, functionalized, all of these levels, that are happening in the tradition. And also set up, again, the project of scientific rationality. right? And really that of technoscience as well, where we are today. For the Heideggerian, and I think where you're going here, that the logos, in a sense, is much more of a gathering, right?
Yeah.
It's a gathering. It's no longer reason. It's not the category of reason in many ways. It's not really a category of reason anymore. So in a way, it's a gathering, an account of, giving an account of, much like we see in this poem we're reading tonight. They're giving it an account of being and not being and non-being. So it's important to remember that, you know, our tradition in the West has really interpreted philosophically logos as reason. That goes back to Plato and certainly from Aristotle on, you know, in many ways. This is really what's happened, and not as gathering and what, you know, Bruno would talk about now as unity of you know, the forces.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we should work on a critique of erotic reason. Many years ago, actually, I wanted to write. I mean, that was a title that you know, I had in mind to write something like. It would be one critique of erotic reason, precisely. But not to look at this from
and a good critique by Bataille of Christian and Gnostic religion and Erotism. Very, very solid work by Bataille. Erotism, you know, that's used by many Christians, you know, to recode, you know, love and this kind of thing, you know. So Marcuse has something very much in, you know, again, Marcuse is thinking through Eros also against the dominant reality principle. For Marcuse, there's a rewriting of Freud going on too, where the reality principle itself is part of the domination of reason, you know, going forward. He wants to talk in the terminology of dominant reality principle versus that of the pleasure principle. And then talk about how the domination of reason in history has produced what we all are subject to, the performance principle, everywhere we go. Tenure, performance principle, you know, evaluations, you know, Wall Street statistics, how much can you produce, fashion industry, everything is based on this performance principle, you know, that, you know,
quantification,
as well as,
which again is sort of based on an assumption of a sort of regularity and a sort of rationality of action and
but we can elaborate more on this, or we can go back to it, certain, but I don't know if speaking more about the question of eros and essentials. It's of course very, very important. So you wanted to say more?
No, I just want to say that I didn't, you know, I just trying to make my own links, you know, my own trick, but it's not by any means to. Discuss it there. What's the question?
Trying
to make my links.
No, it's important
because I'm interested in that and the rescuing of the.
Or I mean, Marcuse, as I said, you know, Saturday, the political fight is the fight for eros, and that's very true today. And this is part of the problem of a lot of the manifestations. It's more about who's getting arrested and who's getting beat up, instead of where is the erotic, where is the energy. What kind of energy is it? And this is a very real thing, you know, in some ways, you know, how do you make it into this more of a happening, you know, a kind of historicity rather than dress rehearsal for how the police will learn how to surveil better. I mean, I was astonished. I hadn't been to Wall Street by Zuccotti Park since they changed it. It's a monument now. It's unbelievable. You've seen, right? I mean, what they've done. It's disgusting. I mean, you know, completely disgusting. But this was a happening for a little while. But again, you know,
that's true.
Right. Okay. No, I was trying to see if I remember, but I don't the exact quote from about the emancipation of the senses.
In the economic and philosophical in the 44 manuscripts.
The eye has become a human eye. So it's the question of precisely not humanity. I mean, eros is what's the body is the human, right? I mean, where the theory and practice come together in a way that it's no longer that there is no longer the disconnect, which and I agree with, you know, of course, Descarte, but it is true that with Descartes we have, no?
We
The
split us in half.
dismissal of the body as a whole, which is by the
Right,
way in
right.
Plato too, no?
Of course.
So, no,
of
I
course.
mean that I am not this body moment, you know.
Well,
It's interesting, no, but every time I see it, I think, no, but I am actually. No, I mean,
yeah, of course.
But when you have the senses as theorists, do we have this unity of the that and what, right? And that is ultimately a principle of God. Then ultimately we become God men.
Right, once God has been precisely, I mean, with Nietzsche, God is dead, and with, of course, Marx also is no longer, and Feuerbach already, of course, before, no? Marx.
Well, and the philosophes in their way too.
Huh?
The
Yeah, of
philosophes,
course,
even before
right.
the 18th century.
But it is precisely no longer...
That's why they're always in trouble, yeah.
Right, and so it is no longer a need. So that's why that's the humanization in a sense. But
I mean, the Grand
humanization
Inquisitor is a
better.
great example of this. The Grand Inquisitor is a great example of this.
Yes.
Why'd you come back, Jesus? We don't need you. We got everything going our way. Remember this? I mean, this is a great, you know, the Grand Inquisitor from the Brothers Karamazov, the dream of Ivan Karamazov that he recounts to his brother in the Brothers Karamazov, you know, and he says, you know, the Grand Inquisitor in Seville during the Inquisition, Jesus reappears. And so the Grand Inquisitor, when he hears about this happening on the watch of the Inquisition, he's got to go interrogate, why did you come back? We figured out what the people want. They want bread. Why you come back with all this teaching? And Jesus is completely silent the whole time. It's a very interesting thing. A masterpiece in literature, and you know, masterpiece, right? But it's part of the whole God is dead of the 19th century. You know, Nietzsche has an insane person announce it. Feuerbach talks about it's a projection of the senses. You know, it's anthropomorph. You know. And then, of course, you know, Marx doesn't even get into these arguments. You know, it's finished with. Religion is the sigh of the homeless.
In a sense, Nietzsche draws the implications from Dostoevsky, who asks the question, no?
Exactly.
If God is dead, then everything is possible.
If we kill God, Kirillov says, everything is possible. Kirillov is the character.
But I also want to go back to the point you make, human and God. No, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that. No, it's interesting in the sense, even in light of Spinoza's truth, God or nature.
It's a different conception of God.
Right. So, I mean, certainly not in the sense that the human is now God. I mean, there is no...
But nature.
But
I mean,
there is no longer the deferral of attributes that are human to the divinity, precisely, right? Because that's the meaning of Feuerbach criticism and Marx. Ultimately, because Marx touches on that too. You know, I mean, that there is this transferring of powers, that our own powers to God.
The interesting thing would be to read this as figures, you know, basically as figures or gestalts and shapes in the history of philosophy. But for Descartes, the figure of God is really the geometric order. This is really what's playing out. I mean, you know, in the mind, you know, this is really what's happening. In Spinoza, it's natura, you know, it's nature, it's participial, and it's very being as a participle, which is interesting, you know, too, you know, in many ways, you know. So, and then, you know, the clockmaker and Newton, you know, that who, you know, keeps time, another figure. Newton. Isaac Newton. Yes. You know, who's keeping the physical time.
Right.
You know, So then in the 20th century, you know, with the advent of, theoretical physics and the new theoretical physics and quantum, etc., then God becomes the long, elaborate mathematical formula. So we now have that desire, right, to write the new formulas. So all the original work going on in scholarship today is in mathematics because they're all forced, right, and useless. Useless, yeah, I agree. And you know, Sartre had a great saying about God. Man is a useless passion because his desires to be God.
Right.
Yeah, this is a great saying of sorts. Condemned to be freedom and we're useless, right? Condemned to be free and we're useless passion. You know, this desire to be God. Yeah, I think it's better to talk about this in terms of monism versus dualism, and you know, in these kind of philosophical categories, you know, than in the religious language of this
Right.
Yeah.
But I maybe I want to finish also with Hegel. I mean, because then he quotes Plotinus after the section you read, Eloy, and he says for Plotinus. In quoting, Parmenides adopted this point of view, inasmuch as he did not place being in a sensuous things, so that's the correction of the Apeiron, also identifying being with thought. He maintained it to be unchangeable, and then the Sophists concluded from this all is true, there is no error. Then we'll get to the Sophists after, right? The holidays at the end of the seminar, and then here, I mean, it's interesting. That's what I mentioned before. Hegel does say that Parmenides began philosophy proper. The difference between Parmenides and Heraclitus in relation to the dialectic. But it is also, he says, you know, again, going back to, well, he goes back to Simplicius that we just read, and again, that it is limited, but also, again, I want to highlight once again, to go back to this, that it is inclusive of potentiality, and then there is a reference to Pythagoras also. He says Parmenides spoke like Pythagoras on the next page, 255. I want to also, and then, but what do you say about this, that maybe next time we'll go back to Parmenides too, because I want to get into that I have anticipated, right, the Heidegger reading of πελεῖν, and maybe now we can do some of the Bunner before we go. I know, or we had to go now, or?
No, we have 5 minutes. I'm not going to be pressured by this.
And here too there is so much, right?
Next week we're just
again, of course, there is.
we're doing Zeno next week.
But I
He was
want to go
tortured,
back to
dude.
Oh, we're gonna continue with Parmenides.
Parmenides.
Okay,
Right,
so we
and then
continue.
maybe also
We continue in Parmenides.
Parmenides,
Yeah.
maybe include Zeno as well. And
No,
then,
I mean-
but-
We can probably fill up the time.
right, maybe we will, yes, and then we do after
Yeah.
the break. I mean,
So-
maybe we do Zeno and then Empedocles and Anaxagoras.
Okay.
And then the atomists, Leucippus and Democritus, and then we finish with the Sophists, who, properly speaking, are not Presocratics, but
Yeah.
but we include that as well.
That's great.
But this is, of course, there is some, some things that we have already said, repetitions. Therefore, I mean, he begins with the idea, of course, by quoting Simplicius. He gives also his rendering of the poem. And it's interesting that Burnet actually the is or is not the decision that must be made in Burnet is precisely set as a question. Is it or is it not? Right? And then, but this is in passage 8, the way he renders this. But I want to,
I didn't bring that.
Yeah, I forgot.
oh no?
What was that?
I had it right there.
Burnet?
No, this is.
But can I, in any case, can I?
No, of course,
go?
read it anyway.
Yeah.
What is this? This is-
Burnet.
Oh, from
Burnett.
Burnett.
Yeah, I mean, I give the reference. I mean, I want to say that again, in his
Yeah.
speaking about passage 6, to which we'll go back briefly, right? That the
What page is that on
the Burnet is 174.
Okay.
I mean, he speaks about that's the end of passage 6. He says the undiscerning crowds who hold that it is and is not the same and not the same, and all things travel in opposite directions. There is a wonderful footnote in which Burnet says, I want to read this, some of it. I construe, he gives the Greek and so on. He says, however, that he goes into the question of πελεῖν, to which we'll go back with Heidegger, and he precisely highlights the fact that the word used for being, that which is, that it is, and then it's not that the expression that it is or what is πελεῖν, and then that it is not is ουκ ενai, which is ουκ is the absolute negation, right, rather than me, which is the relative, and enai being. And he says, however, that there is no difference between πελεῖν and enai, Burnet says in his footnote, except in rhythmical value. Right, but then we will see that in reality, for Heidegger, for example, that's not the case. That there is actually, it's not that he chooses to use πελεῖν instead of enai, right? It just is a variation, because again, πελεῖν seems to be a variation of to be enai, but again, there is this important connotation, moment of being as to be in motion, like I said before, okay? So, I don't know, but in any case, this is what Burnet says, that it is simply a rhythmical variation. We'll go back to this, remember, next time, but then I want maybe to go to page 178 and 179. I mean, if you're, because you said you don't have it, is it okay?
Yeah.
So
Please.
Okay, 178. Then, in the first part of his poem, we find Parmenides, this is Burnet speaking, chiefly interested to prove that it is, right? Just like then Descartes wants to prove that he is. But it is not quite obvious at first sight what it is precisely that is, right? What, the that. And he says simply, what is. What is, is. This is Burnet. There can be no real doubt that this is what we call, he says, very into body. It is certainly regarded as a especially extended, for it is quite seriously spoken of as a sphere. Moreover, Aristotle tells us that Parmenides believed in none but a sensible reality. So we have a different take, in Burnet, of, which is precisely, it ends then when Burnet will say his...
Yeah, no, it reminds me so much of the way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It is the body, which is different from what Hegel, it's a different interpretation, and then he will say precisely that he's actually there is a section, Parmenides, the father of materialism, right? So the body and therefore the sensuous and sensible reality. Parmenides does not say a word about, he said being, although we say being, but it should be word being anywhere. And it is remarkable that he avoids the term God. But then there is another footnote, the bottom of page 178, where he says, Burnet, that we must not render to eon by being, he says, right? Das Sein or l'être in French, right? It is what is, das Seiende, which is, in Heidegger also, we Heidegger, learn that sign is being as such, and how we had to go.
Yeah, almost, yeah. Well, it's quarter of, we're both finishing up.
Yeah, we finish.
Yeah.
And
We
Seiende,
take 5 minutes to get out.
the beings, right? Then maybe I'll say more about this, but in Heidegger precisely the difference between what he calls the grounding question and the guiding question of metaphysics or philosophy is precisely this. One is the question of being, with a capital B if you will, that's sign, right? Being as such, and the other of the being of beings, right? Which is completely different from Heidegger. But in any case, he says, it is not this that we should understand like das Sein, ce qui est. In French, that which is. This is what, so again, because he wants Burnet to emphasize the materialist approach by Parmenides himself, the body. And then he says, as to enai, the verb to be in Greek, to enai, it does not occur and hardly could occur at this date. But in any case, so that's interesting. We'll go back to this next time, right, page 178, and then I want to go into page 179, where he speaks about the plenum, and there is a link that we can make to the atomists. So, but it is a very interesting interpretation that Burnet has of Parmenides that must be kept in mind, certainly, because here too we see the importance of the inclusion of the potential in that which is what it is. Okay, maybe we have that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno. That's right.
Yeah, it's so